God, I just thank you so much for tonight. I just thank you for how much you're already here. Just how real and close you are. God, I just pray that you would just keep coming closer, that you would just keep encountering us just the whole time that I'm talking, God. That we just want you to be present. We want you to be moving, God. Because we just love who you are. Amen. How are you guys doing? Cool. So I'm going to be finishing up our series out of Nehemiah. I'm going to be talking out of Nehemiah 6. And what I wanted to talk about tonight is how God has designed and he wants to use each one of us to do amazing things through. That he wants to do amazing works through our lives. And, he's paid for this, he's equipped us, but so often we let things get in the way. We let things stop us. We stop ourselves in so many different areas. And in Nehemiah 6 is when the wall is so close to being done. They've finished basically the whole wall. They filled up all the holes. All they have to do is put up the gates. So they're almost done with this huge project they've been working on. And it's at this point that their enemies, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, who have been trying to stop it the whole time, they find out and they determine that they're going to do everything they can think of to try and stop Nehemiah and the wall. And this kind of reminds me of the position that we're in, because our enemy, Satan, has basically been defeated. Oh, he has been defeated by Jesus on the cross. But he's still trying to do every last little thing he can think of to try and slow down what God is doing and to try and stop us from the work that God's called us to. And in looking at how Nehemiah faces this opposition and how he's able to stay focused on the wall, I want it to be able to inspire us on how we can do what God has called us to and not let any distraction get in the way. And I don't really like to focus on the enemy very much because I don't really think he's worth very much attention. I would way rather be thinking about what God is doing and how amazing God is than worrying about what the enemy might be up to. But I think that we do need to have a certain level of awareness of what he's trying to do and what he might be trying to use against us, because otherwise we could completely fall for it because we have no idea what's happening. And we could just think that it's us. And over and over throughout this chapter, we see how Nehemiah has discernment, that he's able to recognize when people are coming against him, what they're trying to do, and he's able to know how to respond because of this discernment. And that's something that we see that Jesus had a ton of discernment. People would come up with these questions to try and trick him, and it would say Jesus, knowing what they were thinking or knowing what they had in their heart, would know how to respond because he knew what they were trying to do. And that we need to have a certain level of awareness and discernment so we know not to let these things bog us down. So the first thing that they try and do when they find out that the wall's almost done is they invite Nehemiah to come and meet with them. And he realizes that they're actually trying to harm him. So they're trying to get him away from his community and the project he's doing so that they can take him out, because they realize that he is the one who is spearheading this project. And I love what he responds with. This is Nehemiah 6, verse 3. He says, "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" So he really knows the importance of what he's doing. He has a vision for what he's trying to accomplish. He knows that it's important, and he has his priorities in place, that he's not going to let just anything and everything else take his focus. But he's like, this is so important that I'm going to say no to everything else so that I can focus on this one big yes that he has. And it's so much easier to say no to all the distractions when we do have a vision for what you're doing. If you feel like what you're doing is maybe kind of important, I don't really know, you don't really mind leaving it. But when you realize the significance of what you're doing, then you're not going to want anything to distract you from it. And in Nehemiah's case, this invitation was actually a bad thing because they were trying to hurt him. But I think a lot of times what distracts us is just other good things, but they're not what God's asked us to do. And that we can so fill our life with good things and great things, but we actually miss the assignment that God has asked us to do. He's asked us to focus on. And it's not like Nehemiah's whole life is going to be building the wall. Like, he's almost done. He just needs to focus for like a few more days or a week at most, and it's like finished. And that there are different seasons when God's asked us to focus on different things. And one thing that I found when I was in my second year of school was it was really hard to pick the classes because they all sounded so good. And I didn't necessarily know what I was going to be doing next, so they'd like have one on like working with kids, and I'm like, well, I love kids, I'm probably going to work with kids at some point, I need to take that. And then they'd have like a youth one, and I'm like, well, I'm probably going to do that, I should take that. And like, healing, and like it's all these subjects that I'm like, I need all of these. Like, it was so hard to pick. And I remember one time I wanted to take this dream interpretation class because some of my friends were taking it, and I'd taken a previous class from the teacher and really loved it. And I felt like God told me, like, no, don't take this class. So I was like, okay. So I didn't sign up. And then, like, all my friends were telling me, like, this is an amazing class. We're learning so much. And I was, like, kind of frustrated with God. Because I was like, I was going to, and you told me not to. Like, what's going on with this? And what God told me kind of surprised me, because he said that what you say no to has just as much effect on your focus as what you say yes to. And so often we just want to say yes to everything, that we feel like it's our responsibility to be doing everything, to be helping everyone, that we just feel like I should be involved in every area, but God's actually asked us to focus on certain things for certain seasons and to know what the point is for that season. And what was so funny was the next year of school, they ended up teaching like a synopsis of that class to all the interns. And one of my really good friends was like amazing at dream interpretation, and like she taught me so much and was like, oh, it's not that I never get to learn this, it's just not the time for it. And that when we really trust God with focusing on what he's asked us to, then we're able to accomplish the great things that is his goal for that season. But with Nehemiah, they didn't just give up after he told them no one time. They actually sent the exact same message 4 times. And so Nehemiah just replied with the exact same thing 4 times. You think they'd like figure out by now like it's not really working. And the person that I feel really bad for is whoever's like delivering these messages. Like, it doesn't really say how far away they were from each other. It could have been like an hour, it could have been like a day. But like that would have been so annoying if you've like gone all that way and then like, oh yeah, tell them the exact same thing you just did the last 3 times. Like, makes me so glad for phones and text messages that sometimes we feel like that takes forever. And so after he told them no over and over and over, then it just makes me realize like how much perseverance I have to take. Because it's one thing to tell someone no one time, but if people keep asking you, a lot of times we feel guilty. Or we feel pressure and we're like, okay, I'll just do it just to make you stop asking me. But he knew what he was called to focus on. And it's not our job to help everyone. It's not our job to be doing everything. That we need to know what is God asked us to do and how can we say yes to that and no to everything else. Because whenever you do say yes to something, you're saying no to every other option that you could be doing. So often we don't think about it that way, but like if I say yes to watching a gazillion YouTube videos, like I'm saying no to spending time with God, I'm saying no to spending time with my family, I'm saying no to exercising, like everything else that I could be doing in that time, I'm saying no to. And that we need to be aware when we're saying yes, yes, yes over and over, what are we actually saying no to? So finally, on the 5th time, they decided to switch it up a little bit, and they send a letter with their message. And find the letter. So this is Nehemiah 6, verse 6. And so it says, "It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it's true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us meet together." And I think this must be so frustrating for Nehemiah because these are things that he's tried really hard not to do. Like, he worked so hard to get the king's approval and blessing for this project before he even started. And he's been trying the whole time to make sure that he's not doing it for his own gain, but he's actually doing it for the good of the people. And then here they're accusing him of all these things that aren't true at all. And I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time wondering or worrying about what people think about me. and wanting everybody to like who I am and to approve of what I'm doing. But it's actually not our job to make everyone comfortable with who we are and to make them understand us. It's our job to follow God. And sometimes that's going to mean being misunderstood and offending people. People didn't like Jesus, and he was perfect. A lot of people didn't like the prophets. They didn't always like the disciples. So if we're living sold out for God, I can pretty much guarantee some people aren't going to like you. And it is important that we have some people in our life who we're listening to. Like, you can't just say, like, oh, everybody doesn't like me. Like, then you have a problem. Like, you should have some people that you're taking information from, people that know you, that have a significant role in your life. But you can't have everyone speaking into you because you can never make everyone happy. So how did Nehemiah respond to this? We see it in verse 8. He sent this reply: "Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You're just making up out of your head." And I love this because he looked at their accusation and he saw that there's absolutely nothing true, that there's nothing that he needs to adjust. So he looked, is any of this true? No, it's not. And then he realized that this is actually coming from their own, the way they view the world, their own hate, their own anger, that that's where it's coming from. It's not coming from anything that he's doing. And sometimes the way that people treat you actually says a lot more about how they're doing or who they are than it has to say about who you are and how you're doing. And then we see that Nehemiah is able to get discernment into what they're trying to do with all these things is they're trying to frighten them so that they're actually slow down on the project and that it won't be completed. And I love what he does with this because so often when we realize something that our enemies are trying to do, we end up getting so freaked out and stressed about it. But he just prays, God, would you do the exact opposite? Would you strengthen our hands? Would you strengthen what we're doing? And that he doesn't get overwhelmed with what the enemies are doing. He just prays, God, would you strengthen us? And then we get to the last thing that they try to do, which is a little bit sneakier. So they actually hire a prophet who is someone that Nehemiah knows to tell him that people are coming to try and kill him and that he needs to go into the temple and shut the doors and hide in there, and that's how he's going to be safe. And I think it's kind of funny that they hire a prophet to say this because that's what they were just accusing him of doing earlier. But the problem with him doing that is not only that he would be taken away from building the wall, but also that one of the things God told them is that the priests are supposed to be in the temple. And so him going in there would actually be breaking something that God had asked them to do. And so often when we are being affected by fear, I've never had someone threaten my life like that, but I can imagine that would be really scary. We don't always make the best decisions when we're partnering with fear. And what I've found is a lot of times when I'm trying to decide if I should do something or not, if I realize that one of my main motives for doing something or not doing something is based in fear, it's probably something I should do. If I realize oh, I really want to go on this mission trip, but what if something goes wrong? What if I can't raise the money? What if God doesn't come through? Maybe I should just not go on the trip. That's rooted in fear of God not providing. And I don't want fear to be what is motivating my decisions. How many of you guys have ever had fear try and stop you from spending a lot of time on Facebook? Have you ever thought of going on Facebook and you suddenly experienced tons of fear? None of you guys? Shocking. How many of you have ever experienced tons of fear when you're thinking about playing a video game? The thing is that fear, a lot of times, tries to stop us from things that are really vital and really important. On the flip side of that, I don't really know anyone who is will think about going up and praying in front of people or telling someone about Jesus and not experience some kind of fear at the thought of doing that. Why is that? That's because those kind of things are things that God has directly asked us to do. And those are things that are actually advancing his kingdom. And when his kingdom advances, when he's setting people free, it's threatening what the enemy is doing. In 1 John 3:8, it says that the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. So it's like what God's building and the devil's doing, they don't like live happily side by side. It's like directly clashing. Whenever God advances, he's taking over and destroying what the enemy's been building. So of course, he would want to stop us from partnering with God to see people's lives changed. And probably even the people that looked super bold and comfortable going up and praying for people and speaking, I bet when they started, if not even now, they probably felt some fear. And they just didn't let it stop them, that they pushed through it. And that we always have a choice. Are we going to let the fear stop us, or are we going to do it anyway? And what I've noticed recently, there was several situations where it was just like, it felt like small things that I was like, oh, I feel really nervous. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Like going and giving someone a word that God had given me, or texting a friend with some advice that I felt like God was like, they need to know this, but it was like, oh, I don't know. What if they misunderstand me? Like, what if it's not the right time? Like all these reasons that I like almost didn't do it, but I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do it. And I did it. So as soon as I did it, that's when I saw God break through and touch people's lives. And there's actually things that I've been longing to see and I've been praying about seeing. And it's like, that's what I live to see, is people's lives get changed. And that things that you've been longing for are a lot of times right on the other side of the things that you're afraid to do and the things that you so easily could not do because of that fear. And Nehemiah didn't give in to this fear. He didn't let it stop him. In verse 11, we see his response. He said, should a man like me run away, or someone like me go in the temple to save his life? I will not go. And a lot of times when we are feeling fear, it can be so easy to want to just compromise on things. Like, it might not seem that big of a deal. It's like, here he's building this big project for God. If he gets killed, that's going to be completely, like, shut down. They won't have anyone to lead. Like, he can, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. God won't really mind. God's even given this word. But he wasn't looking at any of those things. He wasn't listening to the fear. Instead, he was looking at who he was, the kind of man that he wanted to be. And he's like, would the kind of man that I am run into the temple and disobey God? No, that's not something the kind of person I want to be would do. And that he was so sure of who he wanted to be that he didn't even consider this, because he's like, no, that's not the kind of person I want to be. And I think so often we're so used to listening to our fears that we kind of do the opposite. That when God shows up and says something he wants to do through us, some great work that he wants to use us with, a lot of times we view that with our fears. And we're like, can I really do that? Could a person like me do something that big? And we question what God is saying. Instead of questioning our fear with who we are, we question who God says we are with our fears. And we can see this with so many people in the Bible. Like Moses does it. Like God's like, you're going to go and speak to all these people. And he's like, God, I stutter. I can't talk to people. No one's going to listen to me. Like my history with them's all messed up. No one's going to pay attention. And we see it with Saul and Gideon. Like both of them are like, my tribe is tiny. My family's tiny. Like I'm the smallest person in my family. Like there's no way. And they're like so used to seeing themselves through their fear, seeing themselves as small, that they almost say no to what God's asking them to do. And it's not fun to fail. No one likes to fail. So a lot of times if we feel like we're going to fail, we don't even want to try. And when we believe something about ourselves, it determines what we're going to say yes to and what we're going to say no to, the kind of things that we're going to live out. This is a kind of silly example, but one thing I used to believe about myself was that I was a very unflexible person, which is still semi-true. But I always thought it was like impossible for me to like bend over and touch my toes. Like I'm like, I don't know how people do that. Like there's no way. I've like tried, I don't get anywhere close. That's impossible. And I probably would still think that way, except for some of my friends invited me to go to the gym with them. And at first I was like, I'm really weak. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like I probably look ridiculous. But I just like, they were making me feel comfortable. So I'm like, okay, I'll go with you. And so I started going with them, and like it actually wasn't that hard, and it didn't take that long for me to get more flexible, and like now I can touch my toes whenever I want. And it's so funny because like it wasn't even that hard. The thing that was stopping me for like so much of my life was that I believed that I couldn't. And what we believe about ourselves stops us so often from doing the things that we think we're just going to fail at. And Jesus is someone who lived out of who he was, who didn't let fear talk to him. In Matthew 3:13 is when he's getting baptized, and the sky opens and the Father says, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased." And then immediately after that, Jesus goes into the desert and is being tempted by the devil. And all of these temptations start with, if you're the Son of God, do this or that. And so he's questioning what God just told Jesus, who he was. And he's trying to get Jesus to work for it and to prove it when it's already true. He doesn't have to do anything to be the Son of God. He already is. And Jesus, of course, didn't fall for those things. And we see even in the Last Supper, in John 13:3, right before Jesus washes the disciples' feet, it says that Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, then he went and he washed their feet. And that he was able to humble himself. He was able to face being misunderstood and being mocked by all those people. He was able to face crazy fear of being tortured and dying, and to completely finish what God had assigned him to do, because he knew his significance and he knew his relationship to God. He knew his assignment from God. And because he knew that it didn't matter what people thought about him, that it didn't matter what he had to go through, because I can face this because I know I'm going back to God. I know that he's given me authority. And that he was able to finish the great work that God had called him to, because he knew who he was, and he didn't let fear stop him. And we see when Nehemiah finishes the wall, at the end of verse 6, in verse 15 and 16, it says, "So the wall was completed in the 25th day of Ulu, in 52 days. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence, because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God." And it had been over 100 years that this wall had broken down. And in 52 days, they built it and they finished it. And the thing is that the things God's called us to, we don't have to do on our own, that he's wanting to do them with us. And that he has equipped us, he's prepared us, and that he doesn't want anything to distract us. He doesn't want any fear to get in the way, to make us compromise and get our focus off from what he wants us to be stressing about what people think about us. That he has called you guys to do such amazing things. And if you'll just push through these things, if you won't let yourself get distracted, then God is going to finish great works through you, and people are going to see it, and they're going to know that God was moving through your life. They're going to know that he was a part of that. So in concluding, I want you guys to take a moment and think if there's any area in your life where fear may be stopping you. If there's any area where you've been listening to fear over what God says about you. So it's going to give you guys a moment just to reflect with God. And as God's bringing things to your mind, as you're thinking of areas, I want you guys to get in groups of 2 or 3, and I want you to pray for each other for those things. Because fear can so easily get us to shut ourselves down. And I don't want that to happen to anyone in this room, because we need what God's going to do through you. We need you to fully be yourself. Yeah, so get in groups and just share briefly what area is stopping you. You can be kind of vague if it's something really personal, you don't feel comfortable, but I just encourage you to just be real with each other, to share, this is the area where fear is stopping me. And then I want you guys to pray for each other for a few minutes for there to be breakthrough. So get up, get in groups of 2 or 3.
that He brought me and know His love for me. Oh, His love for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Free at last, He has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, He died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
what the most common fear is that people have? No, good guess. It's public speaking. Which sort of makes sense to us when we think about it. We're like, yeah, of course, public speaking is terrifying. But why in the world isn't it spiders, or snakes, or giant cliffs, or death, or lions, or tigers, or bears? Oh my. Why aren't we more afraid of things that are going to kill us, but we're terrified of public speaking? We're terrified of getting up in front of our peers and saying something because we're terrified of rejection. We're terrified of being against the grain, of not being normal. And the reason is because as humans, we are so reliant on community, on our tribe. That's how we survive. So being rejected from the tribe would mean death. So that's why it's ingrained to us, into our biology, of how important it is to not stand out, to not be weird, to make sure that you're accepted by the group. And that's why when Laurel was talking about why do we get afraid when we know we need to go pray for someone? It's for that reason. It's because we are not in a culture where that's normal. And so we're terrified of being rejected, of being weird. But Jesus, he calls us to be different. Do you know what the definition of holiness is? To be holy is to be set apart. And that's what we're called to do. We're called to become holy, to become set apart, to not just be with the normal culture, not to, do what everyone else does, but to be over here and be all crazy and go yeah, Jesus rocks. I love Jesus. To be weirdos, right? To just be sold out for Christ. And that's what we're doing here. We're developing that community of crazy, weird, Jesus-loving people. And to remind us all that there is that community, and it's a better community than popular culture, but that we can develop that community and that tribe of people that are with God, and that follow Jesus and his teachings, and that love each other in just a crazy, radical way. I don't know why I just used the word radical, unironically. But that's what we're called to do. And we need to try to get over that fear and realize, yeah, we are going to be weird. People are going to give us the side eye. They're going to think we're strange, but that's okay. Because ultimately, that's what we want to do. And that's where we're going to find fulfillment, with this community of crazy weirdos, not this community of, just normal Western culture. It's not where we really want to be. And so I just want to encourage you guys tonight to pray and communicate with God, and just tell him to remind you that you need to go pray for people, to give you opportunities to go be a crazy, weird Christian, to make sure that people around you realize that you are, in fact, a Christian. So often we have conversations and we have acquaintances or friends, and they have no idea that we're a Jesus follower. And just learn to wear that on our sleeves, and to be open and honest about that, and be a crazy Jesus follower, and just lose that fear of rejection. Because ultimately, if we're rejected by this world, that's fine, who cares? Because we want to be accepted and loved by God, because that's way more important. And so as we pray, I just want us to remember that and reflect on it. And Lord, I just pray that as we go on with our lives, and as we go out in our day and go back into the normal world, that we make sure that we're thinking about you, that we're thinking about who can we pray for, how can we share you with people, and not be afraid of being rejected by modern culture, but just realize that to be rejected, to be set apart, is actually what we're called to do, and that's okay, and that's a better way to live, and to get over that fear of rejection, Lord. And I pray that you're with us through this journey. Amen.
We're heaven-spun creations, his pride and adoration, treasures woven by his love. His careful hands, they hold us safe within his promise of calling and of love. His careful hands, they hold us safe within His promise, the calling in of destiny.
And I will sing of all you've done, and I'll remember how far you've carried me from beginning until the end. You are faithful, faithful to the end.
A father's heart that's for me, a never-ending story of love that's always chasing me. His kindness overwhelming and hope for me unending. He's never given up on me. And I will sing of all you've done, and I remember how far you carried me from beginning until the end. You are faithful, faithful to the end. And I will sing of all you've done, and I remember how far you carried me from beginning until the end. You are faithful, faithful to the end. You are faithful until the end. Until the end. There wasn't a day that you were by my side. There wasn't a day that you let me fall. In all of my life, your love has been true. So with all of my life, I will worship you. There wasn't a day that you weren't by my side. There wasn't a day that you let me fall. In all of my life, your love has been true. So with all of my life, I will worship you.
I will worship you.
I will worship you.
I will worship you. Ooh, I will worship you. Sing out, there wasn't a day. There wasn't a day that you weren't by my side. There wasn't a day that you let me fall. In all of my life, your love has been true. So with all of my life, I will worship. All right, thank you guys for coming. Have a great night. We'll see you next week.